Okay, so tonight's lecture, we're going to be dealing with several things, dealing with primarily with layers, a very important topic in CAD. So under week 4 folder, I've got the objectives there. You can take a look at that, but the layer command and associated that will be properties. But then we're going to go independently look at what we call color, line type, line weight. So these are additional properties. They're both properties of layers and also properties of objects. So we're going to kind of see, these are all commands: layer, color, line type, line weight. Then we'll get into the properties command, match props. And the last thing we'll take a look at would be the UCS icon and manipulating the UCS, and two sub options there, world and object. So you should be able to find this in your week 4 folder. I will be posting the assignment there. Also on Wednesday, we'll be kind of focusing and finishing up assignment 3 and starting into assignment 4. So that's kind of what we'll be looking at. So let's jump over to CAD and take a look at this. So the first thing, let's just kind of discuss what a layer is so we get an idea. Layer pretty much sets CAD apart from just like, say, manual drafting, which is what we would normally be dealing, with CAD at this point. It's just been straight, just drafting. But when we get into layers, what this allows us to do is fracture our drawing out into what you might think of as multiple sheets of paper. So I like to think of a layer really as a, like say a book, how the pages are all bound together and you can't pull the pages out, separate them. And of course, with a book, you can't get them out of order, but there really is no order in terms of CAD layers. You can have quite a few layers. AutoCAD basically says it's an unlimited number, but it's like a number like 32,000 something, and it's way more than you would ever need. However, I will tell you that if you get into complex drawings and like mapping type drawings, those kind of things, it's not uncommon to have 100, 200 layers, something like that. So what these represent then would be, you can think of them as just sheets of paper, and what we're going to do with these is put selected objects on each sheet. And we're going to do that because we might want to group objects that have similar function on one sheet of paper and keep them separate from other ones. So for instance, if we were doing a map, so to speak, if you think about all the things that you would have in a map or out there that you could map, things like center lines of road, edges of pavement, faces of sidewalk, backs of sidewalk, house footprints, trees, telephone poles, electric poles, manholes of storm and sanitary. You can just start to think of all these different things. Each one of those features can be put on its own layer. And then in conjunction with layers, then we can start to give these guys other properties. And we have things like color, line type, line weight that we can add additional to these. So when we set our layers up, we can set them up with these properties. And then the objects that go on that, basically you can think of it as inheriting or inherit that property so that they will show up. So for instance, if I create a layer and assign it a color of red, any object that goes on that will tend to be red. Now there are ways to override that. We're going to kind of show you both methods or both things that we can do there. So we can also set object properties up so they can have their own unique colors. So I can draw a circle and make it red, and then I can put it on any layer I want, but it will retain that red color. So it is kind of important how you handle that. And most people in the CAD world typically work everything through layers. It's just a little bit better to manage things. And actually, it's easier to manage your objects, gives you the most flexibility. And if you want to edit things, it's a really easy way of doing it. So if you do objects by setting properties on them, you're not doing it the way most people in the CAD world do it. So you really are going against the grain, more or less. And so it's probably not the best way of doing things. So we're going to take a look at layers first. And we're going to look at the properties associated with layers. I'm going to show you how to create them, how to delete them, how to manipulate them, and the objects that go on them. and then we will take a look at properties of objects. So you're going to see some kind of parallels there between the two. Then we'll take a look at property manipulation and match props. Those are good little commands. And then, as I said, ultimately we're going to look at this little guy and what he can do for us, and that's called our UCS. So let's start out. We'll take a look at the layer. And this is area, if you're at the Home tab, you can see there's a whole panel associated with layers and quite a few commands and subcommands. So there's really, we're not going to deal with a lot of these, but two major commands here. This one right here, the Layer Properties Manager. The name of the command is layer, and you can just type in LA, or you can just click there specifically. So that's a dialog box that allows you to create layers, set up properties on them, and manipulate them. And another simple way of interacting with layers is this guy right here. This is called your layer control dialog box. And you're limited in what you can do here, but it's a quicker way of doing things sometimes. So kind of we're going to focus in on both the Layer Properties Manager and also then this guy here. Now these are some other things that you can select settings really quickly on layers, things like make a layer current or manage layer properties and those kind of things. So we'll kind of see how that works. And then when we get into properties themselves, you see these commands over here. This is your color command. This is your line weight command, and this is your line type command. They also have transparency down here. And then you have what is called the match props command, which is a great little command. And if we go to this will get us into the properties dialog box. And I'll show you those. So we're going to spend the time first right in this area right here. So right now we have only one layer in AutoCAD. In fact, we've been drawing on one layer specifically. So you always have to have one unique layer in AutoCAD. And right now it has properties associated with it. So we're going to kind of take a look at that and go from that point. So we're going to go into this layer properties manager. You can just type in layer or click on that, and it should open up this dialog box for you, which is a pretty good sized dialog box. And it's also sizable. A lot of the dialog boxes you can't make bigger or smaller. This one you can. So it allows you to do that. Now also at the top here, these guys are what we call layer properties. And if you can't see yours, what you need to do is just go up here till you get that double-headed arrow, and you can drag that column a little bit bigger or smaller. So it's kind of nice to see. I think I've opened mine all up so you can see them specifically. So what we're looking at is what we call layer properties, and every layer has these unique properties. Okay, so the first thing you have in a layer is its name. So the name can be basically anything you want to call it. It can use alpha characters, numeric characters, and a lot of specialized characters, underscore, dollar sign, hyphen, space. But you can't use your slash or your backslash character on. Those are switches in Windows, and so it won't let you do that. So there's a few things that you can't use. Also, the name can be pretty long. It can be up to 256 characters long. Now, I would not obviously recommend that you use that kind of name for a layer, but I do recommend that your names are descriptive. For instance, if you've got a plumbing layer that you're using or plumbing that you're drawing, it makes sense to call it plumbing. Or trees, you can name it tree. Generically or automatically, when you create layers, AutoCAD will just name them 1, 2, 3, 4, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. And at one time when I started in CAD, I used to do that just because it was quick. But I found that I went back to that drawing a couple of weeks later. I didn't know what was on layer 1 or layer 2 or what it represented. So I like to be somewhat descriptive with my layers. I think that's a good thing. Okay. So every drawing that you have in AutoCAD, whether you've created it or someone else has created it or you begin a new drawing, will have this layer called the zero layer. So the zero layer is a special layer. It cannot be destroyed. It can have properties, but it cannot be renamed. So it can never be renamed. It can never be deleted, but it can have separate properties. So technically, a lot of people in the CAD world say you should keep that layer clean. In other words, don't use it. So we've been violating that 100% at this point, but that's okay because we're going to start to do it different ways now. So in general, I try to keep it clean because it does have some special properties associated with it. And it's nice to know that you always have that zero layer out there, but you don't use it for anything. All right, so let's take a look at some of the other properties. The next property I want to look at, I'm going to kind of skip these orders and I'll come back to them, is what we call color. So color is exactly what it says. It will allow you to set colors up for the objects that you want to have or display. So as we go into color, when you click on the color box here, it'll open up what's called an image tile. This is an image tile and it shows you the different colors that are available. So they have 200, or excuse me, index colors, which basically have from 1 up to, I think it's 256 colors, something like that, 255. So these colors may look different on your screen because a lot of that has to do with what your color graphics card is. But there are some certain colors in this box that will always look the same, and that's these colors right here. These are called your 7 standard colors. So in everybody's system, they should look the same. And these colors have both names and numbers. So we start here, that one is red, it's also color 1. Then we have yellow, color 2, green, color 3, cyan, which is color 4, 5, which is color blue, magenta, which is 6, and then we also have white, which is 7. And 7, it's interesting because if you have a black background, your vectors will look white, but if you have a white background, they'll look black, but even though it'll tell you that it's white or color 7. So once you get past color 7, this one, for instance, is a gray type of color, it will not have a name. So the only colors that actually have names are the first 7 standard colors. So very often I use just these almost exclusively because you can notice and you see these are just kind of shades of other ones. So if you're doing rendering or something, these become a little bit more important to worry about their color schemes. But if I'm just doing normal CAD work, I can usually get by with 7 colors. Okay. And again, if you're also printing to a non-color printer, a black and white printer like we have at the college, these colors will be recognized by that printer, but they will show up as grayscale. So white was going to come out really, really dark. Red's going to be pretty dark, but yellow is really light. So they'll grayscale to the fact that yellow, for instance, on some printers almost disappears. It's so light. And I'll show you when we get into the printing, you can also set that to what's called a monochrome print. So what it'll do is it just assumes everything's black and white. So it doesn't change that or use the grayscale. So you also have these things called true colors, and AutoCAD supposedly has 16.7 million color availability. So you can go in and with these sliders, you can make all kinds of different color designations. So we don't worry about that. So that's our colors. So we're going to stick pretty much with the index colors here, and we're going to use the color from 1 to 7 primarily. Okay, so that's called your color property. So the next thing we have, oops, I got one on there I don't want. Let me go back to this. All right. And notice that actually does say white, even though it's color 7. So that's kind of how that would look. All right, so the other thing that we have here is what's called a line type. So line type is a way of conveying information to somebody without color, for instance. So color is obvious. I mean, we can see that. But line types are ways of breaking up a line or an object so that it has a system of dots and or spaces and lines. So for instance, if we look at this guy, what I'm essentially getting at is if I would draw a line like this is what's referred to as a continuous line type in AutoCAD. But if you draw it like this, that might be referred to as a hidden line or a dashed line. They have quite a few different ones. This is a kind of a universal symbol that represents or means center. So this is what's called a centerline line type. So there's a lot of different line types that are available. Not anywhere near as many as colors, as we'll see. But the one thing, and I forgot to mention this, colors are available anytime. They're just available on demand. Line types have to actually be loaded into the drawing file. So right now, as we go to line type, I'm going to click right here on that word continuous. And you'll notice there's actually no line types associated with this drawing other than the continuous line type. So what we have to do is you have to go to the AutoCAD, the acad.lin line type library, and you have to load it. Now you can just load the line types that you want to add, or you can load them all, and they take a really minimal amount of space in a drawing file. So the easiest way is just load them once, then you never have to load them or go back to this command. So to load line types, it's very simple. You just, if you've clicked on this, it brings up this sub dialog box. We're going to go to the load button, and it'll show you all of the line types that are available in the acad.lin line type file. Now you can also have other files. In fact, you can actually create your own line types, but usually I just stick with this. So the easiest way to do it, and you can notice through here, there's quite a few different line types. They're all pretty cool in the way they work here. I'm just going to load them all. So what I'm going to do is right click and just say select all. That becomes highlighted, and then I just hit OK. So now what you're seeing is these guys have now been loaded to this drawing file. Okay, so when I'm ready to use them, they're there. Once I save this drawing, I will never have to load them again. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK for now, come back to that. So one thing I also forgot to mention about line types, which is neat, when you take this line, which is a continuous line, and you apply a line type to it, which is this line type, it looks like it's got dashes in here or spaces. So it looks like it broke this line type up, or this line up, but it really didn't. The line still exists as an endpoint to an endpoint. These guys really don't exist. It's just the way it looks. Same thing with this. Again, it's just an endpoint to an endpoint. And what you're doing is placing a mask on this line so that it looks like this. So it'll have that hollow space there, but it really isn't there technically. Okay, so that's kind of cool. If you've ever had to do that with manual drafting, that's a real big deal. That's a kind of a pain to do. So, all right, so here's one. Let me open this up a little bit. So the other one is what's called a line weight. So a line weight is a way of giving a line thickness, if you will, although thickness is not a good term because in AutoCAD that means really more of a 3D thing. So it's analogous to a polyline. So we've all seen how polylines can have width to them. That's what this is going to do. This is going to give your objects width. And if you notice, as I open this up, there are preset widths in here that we can use. Now this is set up to be in millimeters, but you can also do it in inches. You also cannot create your own widths. You have to use the ones that are in here. They also use what's called a default width, which actually does have some width value to it. I think for, I want to say that it's 0.2. We'll check this out, but I think it's 0.2 millimeters or 0.25, something like that. And you need that because if you have a zero width line set up in your system, your printer actually won't be able to see that line. It'll be so small that it just disappears. So the default width actually has some width associated with it. So this really, line weights really negate or basically get rid of the fact of wide polylines. We don't really need them that much anymore because of that. So that's one of the cool things about them. Okay, so these are kind of major things: color, line type, line weight, and we're gonna play with these here in a bit. So the other thing we have is what we call visibility, and there are two states of visibility with layers. One is called on, off. So if you turn a layer on, you can see the objects on that layer. If you turn it off, they disappear. They become invisible. Okay. Then we also have what's called freeze and thaw. So if you freeze a layer, it becomes, the objects on that layer become invisible. If you thaw it, like it is thawed right now, you can see those objects. So what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference is that when you turn objects on and off, they're still basically there. So you can select them if you're not careful what you do things or how you do things. So you don't get a lot of protection when you turn things on or off. But it's a quicker process because when I turn things on or off, I don't have to go through a regeneration. But with freeze, when I freeze objects, not only are they invisible, but they also are protected. So it's almost like it takes those objects that are on that layer and removes them from the database temporarily so that you can't go in somehow and inadvertently say, move objects or delete them or erase them. So Between the two, freeze thaw and on off, I usually use freeze thaw because not only do I get visibility, but I also get protection. Now I'm going to show you what I mean by that as we get into this. Okay, so a type of ultimate protection is what we call locking. So when you lock a layer, that layer becomes completely protected. So notice when I lock this, it kind of swings over and locks it. So those layers then can be visible on the screen, but you can never select objects on locked layers. So that gives you the ultimate protection. And that way, if you wanted to still see an object that you were working with, you could do it, but you couldn't delete it. Now, interestingly enough, when objects are locked, you can still snap to them. So in other words, you can harvest their geometry, but you can't do anything else with them. So if you're using those snaps, like we talked about last week, those are available on locked layers. Also, a layer that is locked can be drawn on. So it can be what we call a current layer. A layer that is frozen can never be current. So for instance, if I try to freeze this, it's going to tell me you can't freeze it because it's the current layer. Okay, but I can turn a layer that's current off, and I'll show you that here in a minute. The other one I forgot to talk about is transparency. Transparency has the ability to make your objects opaque or transparent. So if you have, like, say, a wide polyline on top of something, if it's non-transparent, which is 0, you won't see anything underneath it. But as you set these up to higher numbers, so for instance, if I go up to 90, it starts to become very transparent. So the objects, you can start to see them behind it. So we're going to cancel that out for now. So normally what we're looking at is this URES state. So the last thing we have here is this plot, no plot. So this is cool because if you set this to what's called a no plot state, what that means is your objects will be visible on screen, but they'll be invisible to the plotter. So that's a really cool process, but you got to be careful with this guy, because if you toggle him on and you create another layer, the other layers also become no plot layers. So you got to watch this one. So I'm going to make this set here. So again, let's just recap real quick. We have the name, we have color, line type, line weight, transparency, visibility of on, off, or visibility of freeze thaw, locking, which is protection, transparency, which is another type of visibility if you want to kind of think about that. And then we also have plot, no plot. Now, I didn't talk about this VP freeze. We're not going to worry about that in descriptions. Those are just be things like, for instance, if you created a layer called gas, for instance, you might describe it as, you know, these are via 12-inch gas mains or something that goes on there. Okay. All right. So this is called the current layer because it's the only layer that exists, and you always have to draw on one layer uniquely. Okay. So what we're going to do is begin to create new layers. So what I'm going to do is come up to this little icon symbol here, and this is a new layer, and you just click it, and notice it generates a new layer for you. And all of the properties that we came from are now copied. Okay. So notice we're on, we're thawed, we're unlocked, we're plot, color. Okay, that's all the same. And notice it automatically just calls it layer 1. You can change that after the fact. Okay, so I'm going to do another one, layer 2, layer 3, and layer 4. So we're going to just go ahead and create those. So if I get out of this box now, and I come to my layer control dialog box, you'll notice that there's my layers. Okay, now they all have the same properties, so we wouldn't be able to tell what's going on from layer to layer as we draw. Okay, so this wouldn't be very helpful. So we're going to go back into this guy. Oh, by the way, also the layer that is shown up here, that name, that's what your current layer is. So if you have 32,000 layers, like we said you could theoretically, there's only one of those layers that can be current at a time. In other words, that's the layer that you're going to be drawing upon or working on. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, if you think about this too with layers, if you had 32,000 pieces of paper, you're going to be a pretty tall stack of paper. So there's a z-ness when you do that, but layers don't have any z value. So they, for all intent and purpose, they're just all sitting on top of each other. Okay, so there's no thickness or buildup of size and layers. Okay, so right now the zebra layer is current. You can tell that because it's got that green check there. We're going to show you how easy that is to change. But we're going to go fix some things, change some things up. So there's a couple things we're going to add right now, and one is the color. So I want to go to layer 1, and I want to click on the color, and we're going to make that color red. Okay, and then hit OK. So you'll notice that little image tile comes back. It says it's red, which is color 1. We're good. So we're going to go ahead and change the line type up so we can see how these guys work. And I'm just going to grab one. Let's make this one called, we're going to make this one called center. Okay, so I'm going to grab one that's called center and hit OK. Now, again, you have to load your line types. If you haven't loaded line types, you won't have anything available to you. Okay. All right, so we're going to go to layer 2, and we're going to change that color. And I'm going to make that green. I'm going to skip yellow because I think it doesn't show up very good when it projects on the screen, but you can use whatever color you want, essentially. I'm going to go ahead and set this up. Now, I'm just making these just crazy settings, but you know, when you really do this in the real world, of course, there's going to be reasons why you're doing certain things. So we're going to grab this one called dot for that one. Okay. I'm going to do another color here, different color. We're going to make this guy cyan. And I'm going to make this, this is a really good one. It's called gas line. So what it's going to do is it actually will incorporate the word gas line or gas with it as it creates that. And let's see, the last one we're going to do is let's go ahead and we'll make that guy blue. All right, and we're going to go ahead and have, let's see what we want to do here. Let's do zigzag just to show you. These are some pretty nice layers or line types, and the way they work is pretty cool. All right, so we have our layers set up. So notice that, again, only one layer can be current at a time. So let's make sure everybody's at the 0 layer. Go ahead and close that. And again, you can show it there. So as we draw objects, this is going to look no different than it has before. So we're just going to go eyeball a few objects in. I just want to show you what happens. We got a, let's say there's a circle, a couple of lines, and notice, of course, that they're white and they're continuous, and that's because of the layer that they're residing on. So now we're going to change this, and so what we're going to do is go to layer 1. So all we have to do is click on that guy. It should say layer 1. It shows me the properties associated with it, and this time, do a 3-point arc. Notice as we draw that arc, it is indeed red, and you can see it's got spaces in there. Now, the reality is if I click on that, notice it's still endpoint to endpoint and a midpoint. So this space really doesn't exist, but it looks like it does, and that's the whole point. Okay. So let's put a couple more objects down just to show you. So that's what would happen with, let's say, an arc. If I do a P line, there's your P line. Okay, so we're just going to eyeball some stuff in so you can see it. Don't worry about where it's placed. And just get some different types of objects. So for instance, let's say a rectangle. There's our rectangle. Okay, so now we're going to place this guy into the layer 2 as the current layer. Now this one's green, and I forget the line type, but we'll find out real quick. So this time when we draw with this guy, it's going to be green. And it's what we call dots. So you can notice, again, it looks like it's broken up into a pattern of dots, and it really isn't. It's just the way it has a look. So here's my P line. And let's see, maybe I'll do an ellipse. Move that out of the way. So we can see how we're building up our drawing, and we're going to see in a minute how this is really going to help us as we get into this. So again, we're just randomizing stuff for no reason, but we're going to see in our fourth assignment why this is going to be kind of critical function. All right, so I'm going to go to layer 3. Now this one has the gas line, I believe. So as I put my lines in here, you'll notice as it zips around, it has the word gas incorporated into it. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Not only is the color there, but that line type has that. And we get this over here. And you guys actually can create your own line types. There is a line type creation command tool that you have in AutoCAD. It's really not too hard to do them. It's kind of hard to incorporate them into other files though. So so you kind of have to know how to do that. But if you want to do some research on line types, you can find that in the internet pretty easily. So there you go. All right. So we're going to go to the final layer now, and we're going to add a few more things. So I'm going to do a line. Now remember, this guy's called zigzag. So notice as I do this, how that zigzag line comes in there. You can see that. Hopefully you guys can see that blue pretty well. Again, circle. Each object's going to take that on, and again, that doesn't look a lot like a circle, but it truly is. Let's see, I'll do another arc here. So I'm just kind of putting about 3 objects of your choice on anything. Oh, I didn't ever do any donuts. Let's do a real quick donut here. That didn't work too well. Okay, so we use, let's see, 0 and maybe 2. Okay, so there's a donut. Notice that one had, because it's got this wacky line type on it, that's what it comes out to be. That's probably not the best object to use, but that's okay. We got it. All right, so I think you got the idea here. So now let's take a look at how visibility plays out. So remember, if we look here, you actually have the visibility state of on, off, and freeze thaw right here. So this is kind of nice. When we start to do this, we can see how this works. So if I go in here and I come up here and I turn layer 0 off, notice what happens. The objects on that disappear. So as we begin to peel back layers, or turn them off, if you will, see, let's say maybe I turn off the 0 layer, layer 1, and layer 2, what's left is just a piece of my drawing. But what's cool about this is actually almost like a different drawing now. So I could print just this out for somebody if I wanted to, based on just the layers that are turned on, and still have the integrity of what I want to display, because maybe the person I'm using this or creating this for doesn't need to see all the other stuff. So I'm just turning it off. What's interesting is I can turn everything off, including the 0 layer. So if I turn off wire, excuse me, not the 0 layer, but the current layer. So notice I'm going to turn off that layer, and I'm going to also turn off this current layer. Now it's going to give me a message that's going to tell me, hey, you're about ready to turn off the 0 or the current layer. Do you really want to do this? And if I say, yeah, sure. What's happening here, those objects are still there, and that layer is current, but I can't see anything. But what's really happening is if I go out here and draw a circle, it doesn't look like I did anything, but I actually did, because it allowed me to draw on that. So there's that circle I just executed. So that's kind of what on-off does. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these guys back on. There I have them back. So now then, let's contrast that with the freeze thaw option within a layer. And I'm going to just go ahead and delete this guy because I really don't need him. So we can freeze layers as long as they're not current. But when we do this, they also, visibility, from a visibility standpoint, they're invisible, but from a protection standpoint, they're really protected. So I'll show you this here in a minute. But let's say if I go ahead and freeze the 0 layer, notice that goes to an ice crystal, snowflake, whatever. And then layer 1, layer 2, just like the visibility with on-off did. But if I tried to do this with the current layer, it's not going to let me. You cannot turn out, so you get this message. So no matter what you try to do, that one's always going to remain on. So if I really truly wanted to freeze that layer, I would have to set another layer current. And in order to do that, I would have to thaw him first and then make him current. And then I could go in and I could freeze it. Okay, so you can see how that works. Okay. So that's how freeze thaw works. So let me show you what protection works, or how that works with this. So let's go ahead. I'm going to turn all these guys back. All right, so I'm going to take all of my objects and I'm going to turn them off. Turn off, whoops. Turn off to 0. I'm going to leave that one on. Yeah, I'll turn it off. What the heck? Turn it off. Okay, so everything's turned on. So if we go to the erase command and we use a crossing, you'll notice that it says down below 0 objects were found, okay? Which is what we would expect because a pick box, there's nothing to select. I'm clicking around here, I'm not hitting anything. My window's not getting anything. My crossing's not getting anything. However, if I go to the erase command and I type in the word all, which says select every object, go ahead and hit enter, whether it's visible or not. It just got them. If you'll notice down here below, it says 25 objects found. So if I went ahead and hit erase, you'll notice that when I turn things back on, nothing is there any longer because I've deleted my whole drawing. So even though I couldn't select them physically, okay, even though I couldn't select them physically, I could still get them by using a modifier of all, which we talked about last week. So let's contrast that now with the freeze. So I'm going to go ahead and freeze everything except the current layer. Remember, I can't freeze the current layer, and I'm going to go and try to erase objects. Notice no objects get selected. Those obviously will get selected because they're there. So let's try this differently. Let's go into the erase command. Let's type in the word all, hit enter. And what it tells me down below is that 5 objects were found, but not 25. So if I say, okay, go ahead and delete, it didn't find the other objects because they were protected via that freeze. Okay, so there's a big difference when we talk about freeze thaw versus on off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and undo that, bring my objects back so we've got them. All right, so hopefully you understand how that works. So now let's look at this lock option. So any object that can, any layer can be locked, not just layers that are non-current or something. So any layer can be locked, and they don't have to be visible to be locked. Although if you can't, they're not going to do you much good if they're invisible. Although just remember that locking does give you protection, complete protection. So if I have objects on here that I want to be able to manipulate, but some that I don't, I might consider locking them. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the 0 layer. Now you'll notice when I lock it, it kind of dims. And that tells me that it's locked. I'm going to lock the red layer as well. Notice they both dim. And also, when you bring your cursor near it, you get this little lock symbol that pops up. So this guy's telling me, hey, this guy's locked, or that guy isn't. So if I want to move this object from that to that endpoint, or that, let's say, midpoint, it lets me do that because I can snap to this object even though I can't select it. Now it'll look sometimes like it's trying to select it, but if I select it and then hit the erase command, it won't let me do it. Because it'll say down here, 2 found, but 2 were on a locked layer, so it won't let you do that. So the locking, it kind of dims that object, or the objects that are on that layer, I guess I should say, and then it gives them protection. But remember, I can still snap to these. So if I want to draw a circle at that, let's say that endpoint of that line, I can still do it because it can still harvest. It still has the ability to harvest that. And notice also, the 0 layer is current, and I just drew that circle. So the current layer can be locked, and I can still work on it. I just can't edit objects on it. That's the big thing about it. And I could go in and lock all of these if I wanted to, but then again, I wouldn't be able to like move things or copy them or fillet them. None of that stuff would work, okay, because they're locked. All right, so that's how that works. There's your lock, unlock. I'm gonna go ahead and unlock it. So the other one we want to take a look at, let's see, is the line weight. Okay, so line weight, simply if we would just go in here and change the line weight from, let's say, a default to a higher value. Watch, it may or may not show up right now. Let me go and do this. All right, it's actually there, but you can't see it because we have to set up the line weight setting. So we're going to type in the word line weight, LINWEIGHT. And what we have to do is display the line weights. Okay, so if you display them on the screen, then you can adjust this slider to a max or min value. I just leave it in the current state. Notice that's what those things look like. Now, the weird thing about this is what they look like on screen. That isn't necessarily what they're going to look like on the print. Okay, so you kind of have to preview them to look at them. But you can see it looks like a wide polygon. Okay, ideally that's kind of what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and set this guy back. I don't use line weights a ton. I like line types and colors the most when I want to differentiate something. Okay, so I can't set that here, by the way. I have to go back here. So remember, default does actually have a value associated with it. It's 0.25 millimeters. Okay. All right, so those are all set right there. Okay, so those are our settings. So let's go take a look at what plot will do for us. So if we've got these guys set up now, we might want to plot them. So if I go to the plotter, and I'm going to do just something real simple. I'm going to just take it to what's called I'm going to do a drawing to a PDF. Okay. So notice I'm going to do what's called the extents, and I'm just going to center it like we've been doing. And I want you to notice over here, it says that, let's see, that the plot is set to what's called none. Okay. So that basically means it's going to just show you your colors the way they will be on a piece of paper if you had a color printer. So when I preview this, notice that's what that looks like. And you can see that, that's my color scheme. You can also see how the line types are showing up. And you can maybe see that they actually do have a line weight to them, because if they didn't have a line weight, what happens is, again, they won't show up on the printer very much. Okay. So this might look pretty good, but if I don't have a color printer, remember what's going to happen. These are going to go to grayscales, and the red color and the white color is going to be pretty dark, but some of these are going to fade out. Like I said, I think if you've had yellow, it can be really so faded from a grayscale standpoint, it doesn't look like much. But just to show you, if I had set this to what's called monochrome, okay, when I do a monochrome preview, what it's doing is everything's just going to be black on white. So that might be the way I want to do that, particularly if you have a case where you don't have a color printer like we have at work at the college. And if you turn stuff into me and you've got colors on it, it's going to fade out. Some of your picture will fade out. So this is a good way of doing it, setting it to monochrome. Okay, but let's take a look at something else that's pretty cool here. So we're going to cancel out of here. So you can say, all right, I don't want to show people certain things. I don't want them to see this blue layer. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set this to what's called a no plot state. And I also don't want them to see the green. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that to no plot as well. So again, notice they're still visible on the screen, but when I go to the printer, let's do a previous print and I preview it, notice some of those objects are missing. The objects that were green and the objects that are blue, they're not there. So it's kind of like a way of not showing your pertinent information or information you don't want somebody to see. You can just turn those layers to a no state, a no plot state. Now you can also freeze them. So you can either turn them off or freeze them, but you can also just set them this way, okay? You have to be careful with this, because I think I've mentioned this, and I almost guarantee that somebody in this during this class will have this problem. If all of these things get set like this, what will happen is when you go to try to print, you do a preview, nothing will show up. A lot of times it's because this is going on. Especially if you got objects on the screen and they're not showing up, it's probably because that little critter right there is turned on. All right, so we're going to take a look at transparency. So transparency is kind of important if you have objects going on top of each other. So let's look at this. Now this is probably not a good one. Let me see if I can move this. I'm going to move this guy just a little. Okay, first of all, you might notice those two objects are crossing, and depending on what was drawn first, one object is on top of the other. So the way we're going to handle this, I'm going to show you this a little bit differently. Let me grab, let's see, let me make, okay, I got the 0 layer current. I think I'm going to just do a real quick donut. Okay, so if I put a donut right here, let's see, oops. Yeah, I'm going to put him right. All right, maybe. Okay, I'm going to put that donut, let's say, right there. So you notice that donut is covering up that green line, it's covering up that red, and it's covering up that white line. Okay. The reason is because for one, it's opaque. So the layer that it's on is saying, hey, you can't see through this. It's not transparent. But the other reason is because as you drew these things, something was drawn first, something was drawn second. So they are sitting on top of each other in terms of the time frame. Not in terms of a z value, but in terms of the time frame. So this guy was the last object that was created, so therefore he's sitting on top of all of these. So I'm going to show you this. We can swap this. If I click this guy right here and right click onto the shortcut, then what I'm going to do is go to this guy down here, which is called draw order, and I'm going to send this guy to the back. So by doing that, when I zoom up on this, you can see, this one's kind of hard to see, but there's the green dots are actually going through this thing, but so you can clearly see the red line going up top. So what's happened is we swapped the draw order and brought that up. This one almost looks like it's not there. Oh, that's because it's not very big. Move that out a little bit. There you go. Now you can see that a little bit better. There. It's just hard to see. So that's one way of handling things. So because I did it that way, when I print it, it'll print that way. Okay. So I'm going to swap this draw order back. And send that draw order back to the way it was and show you another way of handling this same process. So I'm going to send this to the front. So notice again, it's now sitting on top of everything. But because you also have this thing called transparency, what I can do is set that transparency down from 0 to, let's say, 50. So now notice what's happening. You're seeing this object is still on top of these objects from a time standpoint, but you're starting to see them behind it because it's becoming transparent. So the most transparent it could be is a 90 value setting. So let's take a look at that one if we do that. Okay, so let's bounce that up to 90. And there, that's what it would look like. And by the way, the printer, you can also print transparencies. So if you turn that, there's a little toggle in the print dialog box. It allows you to do it that way. So that's what we call transparency. Again, I don't probably use that as much as I could, but I do handle things a lot through color and line types and visibility. So those are the big ones that you want to get a handle on with layers. Okay, so hopefully everybody understands that. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to set that transparency back to the most or non-transparent, I guess, up to 0. All right, we're back in business. Okay, so let's start to talk about some other things now. So once you get an object on a layer, it's going to stay on that layer. Okay, so an object can't exist on 2 layers at the same time. But what I might want to do is move an object from one layer to another. I can simply do that. So the easiest way to do that, there's a couple ways, but what we're going to do is change the property of the object. And the property of the object is the layer that it resides on. So we're going to select that guy, this guy, and this guy. And I'm going to take those guys to a new layer. So notice when I click on them, it tells me what layer they are on. And I want to take that to, let's say we'll take that to layer 1. And notice those guys have now been moved to that layer. Okay. So it's a way of moving an object from one layer to the other. So particularly if you're not paying attention when you're drawing, you get the object on the wrong layer, I can simply move it. So again, I can just pick on this object right here. Let me select it. Okay, so it shows me what layer it's on. When I drop this guy down, let's see, when I drop this guy down, I can move him to another layer. So it's as easy as that. All right, so that's a way of manipulating things. And that happens a lot. So you might, if you're not focused on what layer's current and that kind of stuff, you may have to move things around. So that's just not an uncommon process, not at all. Okay, so let's talk about some other things. So we talked about layers, and we know that layers have properties. They can be on, off, frozen and thawed, locked, unlocked, and plottable or not plottable. So these guys are pretty much properties that are associated with layers. But you have other properties here: color, line type, line weight, and transparency, that really can also be applied to objects independently. And what we're looking at are these guys right here. So this is your color property, this is your line weight, and this is your line type. So notice right now that these guys all say bilayer, bilayer, bilayer. So that state is set to bilayer, such what that means is that when you create objects, that it's not setting the color here, it's setting the color by the layer. It's not setting the line weight here, it's setting the line weight by the color or by the layer. And the same thing here, it's all by layer. This is probably the best way of doing things, but just to show you what we can do is we can go in here and we can say, well, I want to set that current color to magenta. And I also want to set the current line type to, let's say, I'm going to use Phantom. So what I've done is I've overridden the color property and I've overridden the line type property such that as I draw now, what's going to happen? Well, we'll see. Let's see what happens. So I want you to notice the current layer is 0. So that means any object that I draw should be white and it should be continuous. Well, let's go out and let's draw a line and let's see what happens to that line. And you'll notice that, hey, that line is now magenta and it's phantom. Do a rectangle. Okay, it's magenta and it's phantom. So here's the thing. When I look at this, I can't tell you what layer this is on, right? And if I move this guy, all right, so this is on the 0 layer, I'm going to move it to layer 1, which is supposed to be red, and center this object. You can't tell what layer it's on. So I can if I freeze it. If I go in and freeze layer 1, notice that object did disappear, even though it was magenta and phantom. So what we have here is kind of a cross way of doing things, okay? You can either do all of the properties through the layers, which is the suggested way, or you can set things up on the layer, on the object property. So that's not that useful, actually. And there is going to be, you don't have a lot of control. And like, for instance, when I look at this drawing right now, I can tell you pretty much what layer everything is because I can look at my color and my line types and I know these guys are on the same layer. I can't do that with these guys. In fact, these guys are on different layers. Okay, so you have that problem. Now, I'm not going to say there aren't reasons to do that. There are occasionally reasons where you might want to have certain objects on a layer, but you want to override their color, line type, whatever. So I can actually override all of the properties here, plus you can also do transparency. So I can do a transparency override as well. So we have a problem here, okay? This is not a good thing. So what we need to do is fix this. What you really want to do is pretty much, I would say, always make sure that your color is by layer, that your line type is by layer, and your line weight's by layer. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that first. Now you'll notice it's fixed here, but these guys aren't fixed because all we did was created the setting on the color, and we created the setting on the line type, but we didn't change the properties of these objects. So these objects all have properties. So what we're going to do is take a look at the properties command. So I'm going to go to the properties command by just picking that guy right there, or you can type in the word properties, and it'll open up this dialog box. Pretty big screen hog, and it's also, there's a lot to it. But notice right now there is no selection. So, but what we're looking at, the general properties here of any object would be color, layer, line type, scale, line weight, transparency, and thickness. Notice that when I pick an object such as that, automatically now it says, hey, you picked a polyline, and these are the current properties of that polyline. Magenta, 0, okay, you can read that. So to fix this in here, what I probably want to do is just go to here and say, I really want that to be by layer, and I really want that to be by layer, because that's the best principle that you could have on this. Okay, so notice it fixed that. So if you use this command, what I would do is get rid of it when you're done, and also make sure you de-highlight that, because if that's still highlighted, something else can happen, so I always hit the escape key. So notice I fixed this, but these guys are still not set. Let's look at something else here that's pretty cool. If you take this object and you click it, and you right click, notice you can get properties at the bottom. So that's a cool thing. Now this is a cool little tool, because depending on the object, you can also do things like move around the geometry with this. So notice for each vertex, for the current vertex, it's got a coordinate of X, Y, Z. I can change that stuff in there. The circle might be a little bit better one to do. Let me show you this, for instance. So if I click here and I right click and I go to properties, notice one of the geometric properties of that is its area. So right now it's sitting at like 69 point something. Well, let's say I want to make that area 75 square units. I'd have to increase the radius, right? And notice it got just a little bit bigger. And in order to do that, it made that radius 4 something. Well, if I make it 5, because I really want to make that 5, notice it made that increase. So it's pretty cool here, but what we're kind of focusing on is this kind of stuff here, okay? So those are all good principles right there. Now, I want you to notice something that we haven't talked about is this guy called the line type scale, and it shows up right here. All right, so this takes a little bit of a getting used to. So let's take a look at this. All of these guys, oh, let's do this first before we go on. I'm going to go ahead and fix these guys too. I'm going to go ahead and select these guys. I'm going to go to the properties command. Now, even though I picked more than one object, it tells me my layer varies, but I'm going to just go ahead and change the properties here. By layer, and I'm going to make this by layer. Now you can really see what's going on. Okay, so as we look at this, notice there's spacings associated with this. So what happens is when a line type is generated, it's based on a predefined setting. So for instance, this thing might be a 1/2 inch spacing and 1/8 of an, or a 1/2 inch line, 1/8 of an inch spacing, 1/8 of an inch line, 1/8 of an inch spacing, and then that's a repeating pattern. That's what's working there. But if we want to make that bigger or smaller, there's a multiplier that we can place on that. And the multiplier, there's 2 of them. There's what's called the object LT scale and what's called the global LT scale. So let's go to here real quick. So we have what's called an object LT scale. That's a line type scale. And then we have the layer, or the global. The global layers don't have line type scales. Okay, global LT scale. Okay, so these guys have settings. So by default, this is set to 1. So that means if you're multiplying that scale on this object here, 1 times that scale of a 1/2 and 1/8 and 1/8, that's staying the same. If we go and look at this, the global LT scale currently is 1, but we can change this, and actually we can change both of them. Okay, but here's what you need to understand. The object LT scale is multiplied by the global LT scale to actually get whatever your value is. So if this is 1 and this is 2, obviously that'll be 2. If this is a half and this is 1, then you get 1. I'm sorry, this is 2 rather, then you get 1. So this is a little tough, but what most people recommend you do is just leave this guy set to 1. Never change this. This is the one you want to play with right here, that one. So on this scale right here, notice what's going on. The way I get to the global LT scale factor is I just type in LT scale or just LTS and hit enter. This is the global scale factor. Notice it's set to 1, just like I said. If I type in 2 and hit enter, notice how everything gets bigger. Okay, do it again, make it 5. Okay, notice it's getting bigger. In fact, I want you to notice this one has line type on it, but this one disappeared. And the reason is because the scale factor is too big to fit it on here. So even though this is actually a centerline line type, you can't see it because it's too big. So if the line type scale factor gets too big, LT scale, let's say 20, it might disappear on most of them. You can see almost all of them disappeared. Okay, I could go the other way too. So LT scale, it's back to normal. And if we go LT scale, let's say 0.25, now it's even smaller. So you can kind of go both ways. So these settings are important because when you make these things show up on a drawing, if they're really teeny, you won't see them, or if they're really big, you won't see them either. And what you see on the screen is the way it's going to print, or try to print it. Okay, so those are important principles. So the global LT scale is the one we usually use. Okay, and there isn't, by the way, any particular number that you use. A lot of times, the scale factor that you use for the line types is the scale factor of the drawing. So for instance, the drawing that we're using, I think for drawing number 3, or let's say number 2, I think that had a scale factor of 1 inch is equal to 1 foot. So the scale factor was 12. So a good starting reference point for the global LT scale factor to make those line types show up properly would be 12. So that's kind of how you look at that and how you use that. If you want to set the object LT scale factor, what you have to do is go up into the object itself. So let me show you something here. Let's see. Okay, these are 2 different lines. So I'm going to go to this line. Now let's look at the LT scale factor I have set right now. This is the global factor. Notice it's set to 1. So remember, these guys are multipliers. So if I go to this guy's properties, and I set his line type scale factor to 2. Okay, notice 2 times 1 is 2, and 1 times 1 is 1. Even though these guys are on the same layer, they have the same line type, what I've done is I've changed the object's LT scale property, okay, to a different value than this. Okay, so that can be a useful thing, but it can be really hard if you start messing around with all of those. So what I recommend you do is not do this so much. What I would recommend you do is you leave your global scale factor set, or your object scale factor settings to 1, and you handle everything through the LT scale factor, LT scale. We increase it or decrease it here. So maybe we would want that to be 2. Okay, the only downside to that is that it's going to do it across the board. Okay, so that's the only downside. All right, so let's take a look at the line type scale, or the line type command, actually. So if I go to the line type command, just type, or line type. Oops. So I'm going to go into line type. It brings me to this dialog box. And what this dialog box does for me is it shows me what's loaded, so I can load or unload line types in here. But if I go to show details, notice what it shows me is that your current global scale factor setting is 2, because we did it down here through the command line, but the current object scale factor is 1. So what that means is that when you're drawing, or as you draw, all of your objects are being created with an object scale factor of 1. So again, usually you want to leave this set to 1 right here and then not mess with it. But I can get to this guy by just typing in LT scale. I don't have to go to the manager, okay? So that's kind of how we would create that right there. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and close that. And I think that's pretty much everything in conjunction with layers. There are some pretty cool little commands here, so if you might want to look at them, we don't need them. But for instance, if you want to, let's say, make a layer current. Now, it's easy to just go up here, find the layer you want, and click on it. But if you have 200 layers, that gets to be tough. So this little guy is cool because you just say make current, and you just pick the object that you want, and it'll set that to whatever that layer is. Okay, so that's a really cool little thing. Or we have like a freeze thaw. So if you want to freeze everything here, you can just freeze the layer by selecting that, freezes that layer, freezes that layer. And it won't let me freeze that layer because it's current, but that's a quick way of doing things. So there's some really cool things that we can get into with layers and how they work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to thaw those guys back. Okay. So we've taken a look at the layers, we've taken a look at their properties. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, and this is important too. Layers can be deleted, okay? But there's a couple, one thing that's important about that to understand. No layer that is current can be deleted. So if I tried to go to layer 1 and delete it, it's not going to let me. Now, the other thing is the 0 layer can never be deleted. Okay, it's not going to let me. All of these other layers will not let them be deleted either because they have objects on them. So if I go to any other layer, they're not going to be deleted because they all have objects on them. So just to show you this, if I go in and I delete everything off of layer 1, so there's nothing out there that's on layer 1. I think we're clean now. And layer 1 isn't current, okay, I can now go into layer 1 and I can delete it. Okay, notice it's gone. So the good thing is you can't delete layers that have objects on them, because if you could do that, then basically you could purge your whole drawing away, and that would be a bad thing. So we don't want to have the ability to do that because that's not a good thing. All right. So this one tool, I'm going to go ahead and undo this stuff. Have it. Okay. So another nice feature about layers is this guy called match props. This is a nice way of matching things that you want to match properties of. So again, you can do some of that stuff up here, but this is a quick way. So let's say I want to make all of these lines or I want to move them all really rapidly onto this layer here. So I go to match props. This is my source, and then I just come in here and I click that, and I click that, and I click that, and I'm moving these things really rapidly, okay? When I get done, I just hit enter, and I gotta move. So that's a match props. And match props, you can tell it what to match and what not to match. So if we go to match props, and we select the source, then they have these things here called settings. So if I go to settings, notice anything that has a check will match, and anything that doesn't have a check won't. So I could match the layer, but I won't match the color, or I could match the line type. So I can turn some of these off. And actually notice there's a lot of these are all object properties that I can match. And these are other things that are associated with particular types of objects. So you have special properties for polylines. We have talked about polylines, but we haven't talked about really any of these other things. So that won't really work for any of these other things that we talked about. But you can turn these things off and mix and match things for your settings. You have probably, for most of us, we would probably have these turned on, and they're going to all be on by default. So that's going to be the important thing. So the other thing to understand with layers too is this set of layers only exists in this drawing, but if I do save this drawing, I'll have them. So I'm just going to go and save this real quick. I'll just throw it in my documents, call it drawing 1, and I'm going to close it. So notice when I open this drawing up again, or not this drawing, but a new drawing, notice no layers, no line types have been loaded or anything. So because all of that information is coming from that template drawing file that we talked about initially. So that's the reason that it really, it's there. You just have one layer. But if I open up the drawing that I just created, drawing one, notice that when I open up drawing one, everything that was in there is there, including the layer scheme, colors, the line types, all of that kind of stuff. Okay. And with line types, by the way, also one of the things I mentioned, you can purge these out if you're not using them. I don't know if I can do it from here or not. No, I don't think I can. But there's a way to go into a command that allows you to purge things out. So in other words, if you have all your line types in there, but you don't only want all of them in there, you can get rid of the ones, you can take them out, just like you can purge layers. Again, line types take such a small amount of room, I never worry about that. But if you have the ability to do that, you want to save some space, you can. One of the things also, a lot of times in industry, when you get drawings from industry, from people that are doing things like maybe architects or landscape architects or even mappers, they may have, you could have 200 layers, but maybe they're only using 50 layers. So I can get rid of the ones that I don't need or I don't want, and that process is called purge. So I'm going to show you that real quick, even though I didn't have that. So if I just type in the word purge, it'll allow me to purge anything that's not being used. Okay, so right now there's not too much that's purgeable in this drawing. Let me see, but line types are. So right now, any line type that's showing up in this list is purgeable, I believe. So I could tell it to purge all of these line types right here that I'm not using if I didn't want them to be in my drawing. Now, I may need to reload them later, and as long as they're not being used, I can just say purge the checked items, purge the items, purge all checked, and they're gone. So that's a way of getting rid of things. So, and I do that a lot with drawings that I get, like I said, from people that are in industry, because people do all kinds of crazy stuff, and they had all these layers. Maybe they use them at one time, maybe they're not, and I don't need them anymore, so I'll just get rid of them. It just is a way of decluttering that drawing while I'm working in it. Okay, so I hope that everybody's gotten a handle on that. We're going to be working on an assignment 4 that's going to be utilizing this process. So we're going to move on to the last topic for this lecture, which is dealing with the UCS icon and the UCS icon and the UCS command, which is a way of manipulating it. So I'm just going to begin a new drawing. I'm going to just trash this. Okay, so this guy is called our UCS icon. And remember, this is indicating for me the directions positive X, positive Y, and positive Z space. And because of the right-hand rule, as we talked about first week, this is the direction of positive X, this would be the direction of positive Y, and that box tells me I'm in positive Z space. So right down here below where my cursor is, I'm in positive Y space here and negative X space here. So this guy's a virtual little critter. He doesn't really technically exist, so he can be well, we don't have to worry about it because he'll never print. But if you don't ever want to use this thing, you can just turn him off. So there's 2 commands that we're going to take a look at tonight associated with him. One is the UCS icon command, UCS icon, and then we're going to look at the UCS command. Okay, and UCS stands for user coordinate system. And primarily you have several user coordinate system. So you have what's called a user system, and then you have what's called the world. And the world is what's in effect always. And you can never get rid of it. You can never purge this. But you can create user systems, and you can have as many as you want. And they're useful when you get into this to be able to utilize to help you draw, as we'll see. So if we go here, and we get back to the UCS here, this guy, this icon, again, is indicating my positive X, positive Y, Z. If I don't want to see it, I can turn it off. So if I go to the UCS icon command, all one word, notice I can turn it on, I can turn it off, or I can make it selectable, which I'll show you this, or we can change properties. So let's just, I'm going to turn this off, and notice he just disappears. So you're still dealing with a world UCS, you still have all the right-hand rule and all that, you just don't see that. So there are people that probably don't care about that UCS, and sometimes for them, they just get rid of it. But we're going to use it, so we're going to want to turn that back on. So we're going to go user UCS icon, and we're going to turn it back on. So what does selectable mean? So this is dangerous. Notice if I click on my UCS icon, well, it looks like it's got grips, and these grips can be used to modify his location. And what's happened now, you may notice the look of the UCS is different than it was. There's no little box there anymore. So what that's telling me is I'm now in a user system and not the world system. And that can be a problem if you've moved that thing. Further, watch what can happen. Not only can I move it, but I can also rotate it. So notice how my grid aligns completely differently. So these are really cool to be able to use. These are cool tools, but this one isn't cool the way we've got this right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this back. So I'm going to move this back. Let me just do this real quick. Okay, so the commands that manipulate how that looks, or the command, I shouldn't say commands, the command that manipulates how that UCS looks is the UCS icon command. I forgot to show you this. UCS icon. If we go to properties, notice you can change the look of it from, let's say, a 2D look to a 3D look. You can change its size, you can change its color. So right now it's set to white. Now there's two UCSs, so notice there's a blue one. So for instance, when I go into model space or into paper space, notice that's the UCS icon. And he's also selectable and grippable, so should be. Let me do it, but anyway, I can manipulate him too, but notice he's a different color. So this is a 2D UCS, and this is a 3D UCS, okay? And so I don't change that up too much, but we're going to use this to do some things with. So for instance, let me just draw a rectangle here. So let's say you want to work up in this rectangle. Let's say that rectangle represents some kind of space that you're working with. If I have to define all of the coordinates on this guy with respect to where the origin is, we already know how much of a hard process that is. There's too much calculation going on. But if I can set this corner to an effective 0, 0, it might be easier for me to work. Well, basically all I have to do is click this UCS, move that from that grip to that endpoint. And now I have a new grid that's lining up with this being where 0, 0 is. Now, effectively, it's a new user, but you actually still have the world sitting back here. So you can never blow out the world. The world is always going to be there. It's just that I can have different user systems. So if you need to get back to the world, here's how we do it. Just type in the word UCS. Notice there's a lot of sub options here, but one of them is world, and actually the default is world. So all you have to do is hit enter. So now I'm back into the world. So again, if I click on this guy, that's a user. To go back to the world, just go UCS, enter, enter. I can fix it. All right, so what's really neat about this is if we rotate this let's say we want to rotate this guy. I'm going to rotate this real quick. Rotating. So now, if we're trying to deal with coordinates up here that are parallel with this face and that face, trying to go from this to that is really tough. So again, UCS, this is where it's really nice. And if I go into, again, I could go into UCS, I could grip him, take him to this endpoint, and I could rotate him and line him up with that endpoint. Okay, and you can see how nice that is. So now this allows me to work very effectively with this object based on that UCS. And when I'm done, I set my UCS back to world. Okay, so here's another cool thing. If you have line work, let's say like this, particularly if you want to, let's say you want to, oops, I didn't want to do that. If I want to, let's say write text along this line, I don't even know what that angle is. So I can effectively just change the UCS so it's parallel with that. So here's how we do this really effectively. UCS, I already showed you I could do it by gripping it, but there's this option called object, which is really neat. So you just click on the object, boom, that does it. It lines it up and it rotates it. Go do it again, UCS object, click it, go. You can see how rapidly that works. And we're going to be utilizing this command right here, UCS object and UCS world, to do and construct this fourth assignment that we're going to be getting into. Okay. So there's a lot of other sub options associated with UCS, but we just need those two, world and object. Okay. And you can also recognize the fact that you could grip them. I mean, I could, like I said, I could grip this guy and I could move him via grips, but that takes a lot more work. Object is a lot more straightforward because notice that's still not rotated, so I'd have to further rotate it. Okay, so getting back to the world, UCS world, UCS object, and it's real straightforward. All right, so hopefully you don't have any questions. If you do, I'll go over some of this on Wednesday again, or answer some questions on Wednesday. You can certainly feel free to email me questions. I'll be around tomorrow, off and on, and in the evening. And don't forget, if you guys do have intense questions or something that you just can't ask through email or answer through email, we can do a Zoom session. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I'm going to get this guy set up on YouTube. So this should be available real soon. See everybody on Wednesday.